The first thing anyone noticed about Ashford House was the silence. Not the comfortable silence of a house at rest, but the held-breath silence of a place that had learned not to make a sound lest it disturb something fragile. The second thing they noticed, if they stayed long enough, was the dinner table. Every evening at 7 o'clock precisely, in the great dining room with its coffered ceiling and its portraits of disapproving ancestors, 2 places were laid. 2 plates of the good china, the Sèvres with the blue and gold rim that had come from France before the Revolution. 2 crystal glasses, the ones that rang like bells when they touched. 2 settings of silver, the heavy Georgian flatware that bore the Ashford crest. 2 linen napkins, pressed and folded just so. And every evening at 7 o'clock precisely, Gideon Ashford, the 9th Duke of Ashford, sat down to dine. Alone. He sat in his chair at the head of the table, and the second place, the one to his right, the place of honor where a duchess would sit, or a beloved companion, remained empty. The food was served to both places. A footman would bring the soup and ladle it carefully into both bowls. The fish course, portioned onto both plates. The meat, the vegetables, the pudding. 2 servings, always. 1 eaten, 1 untouched. And when the meal was done, the untouched plate would be taken away, and the food on it, still perfectly arranged, growing cold, would be thrown out, not given to the servants, as was the custom in most great houses, not sent down to the poor at the gates. Thrown out, every night, for 7 years. The servants knew not to speak of it. Mr. Pemberton, the butler, had made that clear the very first week after the Duke returned from Italy, hollow-eyed and silent, and gave the order that 2 places were to be laid. "We do not ask," Pemberton had said to the assembled staff in his dry, precise way. "We do not speculate. We do not gossip. His Grace has his reasons, and they are not our concern. We serve. That is all." And so they had served, for 7 years, and they had not asked. But they had wondered. Oh, they had wondered. Some said it was for a dead wife, though the Duke had never married. Some said it was for a lost love, a sweetheart who had jilted him or died before they could wed. Some said, in whispers, in the servants' hall, late at night, that it was for a ghost, and that the Duke was mad, and that one day he would be found talking to the empty chair as though someone sat in it. But he never did talk to it. He simply ate his dinner, quietly, methodically, as though the empty place across from him were the most natural thing in the world. And then he would rise and go to his library and sit alone until midnight, reading books he did not see. That was the house that Clara Hartley came to in the autumn of 1821. She came with a letter of introduction from the Duchess of Lennox, who was the Duke's godmother and the only person in England who could get him to answer correspondence. She came with 1 small trunk, 3 serviceable dresses, and the desperate, quiet hope of a woman who had run out of choices. The position was for a librarian. The Duke's library, the letter had explained, was in disarray after years of neglect. He required someone with education, discretion, and a strong constitution to catalogue the collection and restore order. The pay was generous. The work was solitary. The Duke, the letter noted carefully, preferred not to be disturbed. Clara, reading between the lines, understood. The Duke was difficult, reclusive, possibly mad, and no one else would take the position. She also understood that she had nowhere else to go. Her father, a country vicar, had died 18 months ago. Her brother had inherited the living and the vicarage, and his wife had made it clear that Clara, unmarried, 26, and inconveniently educated, was no longer welcome. She had spent the last year as a companion to an elderly lady in Bath, a position that ended when the lady died and left her nothing. She had £10 to her name, no prospects, and winter coming on. A difficult, reclusive, possibly mad Duke was better than a winter in the streets. So she had written to the Duchess of Lennox, whom her father had once served as chaplain, and begged for help. And the Duchess, in her brisk, kind way, had secured her this position. "Ashford needs someone," the Duchess had written in her reply. "He will not admit it, of course. He has not admitted to needing anything in 7 years, but he does. And you, my dear Clara, are exactly the sort of person who might do him some good. You are clever, you are patient, and you do not suffer fools. He is no fool, but he is a man in great pain, and pain makes fools of us all. Go to Ashford House, catalogue his books, and perhaps, if you are very patient and very clever, you might catalogue him as well." Clara had not understood that last part. She understood it a little better when she arrived. Ashford House stood in Derbyshire, in a valley between 2 ridges of high moorland, grey stone against grey sky, severe and beautiful in the way of things that have stood a long time and expect to stand longer still. The grounds were immaculate. The house was immaculate. Everything about it spoke of care, of money, of attention to detail, and yet, as Clara stepped down from the coach and looked up at the facade, she felt it again, that held-breath silence, as though the house itself were waiting for something. Mr. Pemberton met her at the door. He was tall, thin, 65 if he was a day, with the kind of face that gave nothing away. "Miss Hartley," he said, with a bow that was correct to the inch. "Welcome to Ashford House. His Grace is not receiving at present, but he has instructed me to show you to the library and to your quarters. If you require anything, you have only to ring." "Thank you," Clara said. "I hope I have not arrived at an inconvenient time." "There is no convenient time at Ashford House, Miss Hartley," Pemberton replied, and though his tone did not change, Clara thought she detected the faintest hint of something, irony, perhaps, or weariness, beneath it. "But there are no inconvenient times either. The house runs to its own rhythms. You will learn them." He led her through halls that smelled of beeswax and lavender, past rooms with holland covers on the furniture, up a grand staircase to a corridor lined with portraits. At the end of the corridor, he opened a door. "The library, Miss Hartley." Clara stepped inside and caught her breath. It was a disaster. Not a picturesque disaster, the kind where a few books are charmingly askew on a shelf. A real disaster. Books were piled on tables, stacked on the floor, crammed sideways into shelves where they did not fit. Some were lying open, face down, spines cracking. Some were water-damaged, the pages rippled and stained. Dust lay thick on every surface. The curtains were drawn, and the air smelled of mildew and neglect. In the corner, a stack of books had toppled and lay in a heap like a cairn. "Good Lord," Clara said, before she could stop herself. "Indeed," Pemberton said, "His Grace has not entered this room in 7 years. He has, I believe, quite forgotten it exists. You will have your work cut out for you, Miss Hartley." 7 years, Clara repeated. What happened 7 years ago? Pemberton's face did not change, but his silence was answer enough. "I see," Clara said. "We do not ask." "We do not ask," Pemberton agreed. "Your quarters are just there, through that door, a small chamber, but private, and with a good fire. Mrs. Sims will bring you your meals. You will dine in your room, unless His Grace requests otherwise, which he will not. You are not expected to attend household prayers or to appear at dinner. You are here to work, Miss Hartley, and to be very, very quiet.
I am very good at being quiet, Clara said.
I believe you are, Pemberton replied, and then, in a slightly different tone, almost gentle, His Grace is not a bad man, Miss Hartley. I would not want you to think him cruel or capricious. He is only broken, and a broken thing must be handled carefully, or it shatters entirely. I understand, Clara said, though she did not quite. But she would. She began the next morning. She started with the most basic task, sorting the books into piles: fiction, history, philosophy, poetry, natural science, travel. Anything that was water damaged went into a separate pile for repair or disposal. Anything that was torn went into another. It was slow work and filthy. By midday, her hands were black with dust, her dress streaked with grime, and she had filled half a notebook with titles in her small, neat hand. Mrs. Sims, the housekeeper, brought her lunch on a tray: bread, cheese, cold meat, apples, tea, and looked around the library with the expression of a woman surveying a battlefield. "You'll never get through it all, miss," she said. "I will," Clara replied. "It will just take time." 7 years it's been like this, Mrs. Sims said, echoing Pemberton. 7 years since he's set foot in here. Used to be his favorite room in the house, this. He'd spend whole days here when he was a boy. His father despaired of him. A duke should be out riding, managing the estate, he'd say. But young Gideon, His Grace, I mean, he loved his books more than horses. What changed? Clara asked, carefully casual. Mrs. Sims pressed her lips together. "We don't speak of it, miss." "Of course," Clara said. "Forgive me." But Mrs. Sims, who had a kind heart and who had seen too many people tiptoe around the Duke's grief, softened. "You'll hear it anyway, miss, in the village, so it may as well be the truth you hear. 7 years ago, His Grace was engaged to be married. A Miss Thornley, from Nottinghamshire, a lovely girl, they said. He was mad for her, went to Italy for the wedding. Her family had a villa there. And then something happened. No one knows quite what. She died, miss. A fever, they said. And he came back alone." Clara felt a cold finger trace down her spine. How terrible.
Terrible,
Mrs. Sims agreed. "And he's not been the same since. Won't see anyone. Won't go to London. Won't take a wife, though the family's been after him for an heir. Just sits in that dining room every night with 2 plates laid, as though she's coming back." "The second plate is for her?" Clara asked. "Must be, mustn't it?" Mrs. Sims said, "though he's never said, never speaks of her, never speaks of Italy. Just came back and shut himself up here like a man in a tomb." She collected the tray and left, and Clara sat very still in the dusty silence, thinking. A man who set a place for a dead fiancé every night for 7 years. A man who had not entered his library, his favorite room, for 7 years. A man who was, in Pemberton's words, broken. She looked around at the ruined books, and she understood, suddenly, what the Duchess had meant. Perhaps, if you are very patient and very clever, you might catalogue him as well. The books were not the only thing in disarray. The Duke was, and Clara, who had spent her whole life mending broken things, her father's broken health in his last years, her brother's broken finances, her own broken prospects, felt a familiar stirring. Not pity, She had learned long ago that pity helped no one, but something else, a quiet, stubborn determination. She could not mend a dead fiancé. She could not bring back what was lost, but she could mend a library. And perhaps, in mending it, she could remind a man that some things, at least, could be put back in order. She rolled up her sleeves and went back to work. She did not see the Duke for the first 3 weeks. She heard him, though. Every evening at 7, she would hear the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor, the opening and closing of the dining room door. And later, much later, past midnight, she would hear him walking the halls. Slow, aimless footsteps, the tread of a man who could not sleep and had given up trying. Once, very late, she heard him stop outside the library door. She was still working. She often worked late into the night, finding it easier to think in the silence, and she froze, holding her breath. The door did not open, but she heard him there, on the other side, just standing, just there. And then, after a long moment, the footsteps moved on. She did not know what to make of it. By the end of the first month, she had cleared half the room. The books were sorted, the damaged ones set aside, the shelves slowly filling again, in proper order. She had also begun to notice things. The books themselves told a story, if you knew how to read it. There were novels in French and Italian. He had travelled then before. There were volumes of poetry, much thumbed, with passages underlined. Byron, Keats, Shelley, the Romantics, a young man's taste. There were works of philosophy, Hume, Locke, Rousseau. A serious mind then, a mind that asked questions. And there were travel journals, dozens of them, describing Italy, Greece, Egypt. A man who had wanted to see the world. All of it abandoned, all of it left to rot. She found a small book one afternoon, wedged behind a stack of larger volumes, nearly hidden. It was a commonplace book, the kind a person keeps for copying out favorite passages, recording thoughts. The handwriting inside was bold, confident, masculine. The Duke's, she thought. The entries were dated. The earliest was from 1808, when he would have been, what, 16, 17. They were the musings of a young man trying to understand the world, quotes from books he'd read, observations about the estate, about his duties, about the weight of the title he would inherit. And then, abruptly, in 1814, the tone changed. Met E.T. today. At the Bellingham's ball, she quoted Dante at me. In Italian, I am completely undone. Clara's heart gave a small, painful twist. E.T., Miss Thornley. The entries that followed were full of her. Plans for courtship, descriptions of conversations, the unguarded joy of a man in love. And then, in the spring of 1814, she has agreed. We are to be married in Italy, at her family's villa. I cannot believe my good fortune. I do not deserve her, but I will spend my life trying to. The final entry was dated June 1814. We leave for Italy tomorrow. The next time I write in this book, I will be a married man. I will be the happiest man alive. There were no more entries. Clara closed the book very carefully and sat with it in her lap for a long time. She thought about a young man, full of hope, traveling to Italy to marry the woman he loved. She thought about what it must have been like to come back alone. She thought about 7 years of silent dinners with an empty plate, and she made a decision. She could not mend the Duke, but she could, perhaps, remind him that he was not the only person in the world who had lost something. That evening, She left the commonplace book on the small table outside the library door, open to the last entry. She did not know if he would see it. She did not know what he would do if he did. But she left it there, like a message in a bottle cast into the sea, and then she went back to work. The next morning, the book was gone. Clara did not know if that was a good thing or a terrible thing. But 3 days later, something changed. She was working in the library, as usual, when the door opened. She looked up, expecting Mrs. Sims with her tea. It was not Mrs. Sims. It was the Duke. Clara had never seen him before, except in portraits. The portraits showed a young man, handsome in a serious way, with dark hair and darker eyes, and the kind of face that looked as though it did not smile often, but when it did, it meant something. The man standing in the doorway looked like the portrait's ghost. He was thin, too thin. The bones of his face stood out sharply. His hair, still dark, was untidy, as though he had raked his hands through it and forgotten to smooth it down. His eyes were shadowed, exhausted. He was dressed well. A duke is always dressed well, but there was something careless about it, as though he had put the clothes on without noticing what they were. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to live and was simply going through the motions. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then the Duke said, in a low, rusty voice, "You left my book in the corridor." "I did, Your Grace," Clara said. She did not curtsy. She did not simper. She simply met his eyes. "I found it while cataloguing. I thought you might want it back. You read it." It was not a question. "Yes," Clara said. "I'm sorry. I should not have. But I did. And now, you pity me." "No," Clara said, and she meant it. "I do not pity you, Your Grace. I think you have had quite enough of pity." He blinked, as though she had said something unexpected. "What do you think, then?" he asked. Clara considered. She could lie. She could offer some polite platitude. But she had never been very good at lying, and she suspected the Duke would know. "I think," she said slowly, "that you loved her very much. And I think you have been punishing yourself for 7 years for something that was not your fault. And I think it is a terrible waste." The silence that followed was so long and so profound that Clara thought she had gone too far, that he would dismiss her on the spot. But then the Duke said, very quietly, "You know nothing about it." "No," Clara agreed. "I do not, and I do not ask to, but I know something about loss, Your Grace. I lost my father 2 years ago, and I know what it is to feel that the world has ended and that nothing will ever be right again." "And?" the Duke asked, his voice sharp. "Did you set a place for him at dinner every night? Did you refuse to live because he was dead?" "No," Clara said, "but I wanted to. For months, I wanted to. And if I had been a duke, with no one to tell me I could not, perhaps I would have." She paused. "The difference, Your Grace, is that I could not afford to stop. I had a brother who needed me. I had pupils to teach. I had a household to run. I had no choice but to keep living, even when I did not want to. You have had a choice. And you have chosen this." She gestured around the ruined library. The Duke's face was unreadable. Then he said, "You are very blunt, Miss Hartley." "Yes," Clara said. "I am told it is one of my least charming qualities." "I did not say it was not charming," the Duke replied. And for the first time, Clara saw the faintest ghost of something in his eyes that was not exhaustion, curiosity perhaps, or the very beginning of interest. He looked around the library, taking in the organized shelves, the neat stacks, the slow restoration of order. "You have done a great deal," he said. "I have done some," Clara replied. "There is a great deal more to do." "Why?" The question was not hostile, it was genuine. "Why what, Your Grace? Why do you care? It is only a lot of dusty books in a madman's house. Why not simply take your wages and do the minimum required?" Clara thought about that. "Because," she said at last, "I do not like to see things wasted. Books are not meant to rot on shelves. They are meant to be read, loved, passed on, and a library is not meant to be a tomb. It is meant to be a living thing." She met his eyes. "And neither, I think, is a man." The Duke stared at her for a long, long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and left. Clara stood alone in the library, her heart pounding, wondering if she had just thrown away the only position she was likely to get. But the next morning, when Mrs. Sims brought her breakfast, there was a note on the tray. It was in the Duke's handwriting. She recognized it from the commonplace book. It said only, "Continue." After that, things changed. Not quickly, not dramatically, but they changed. The Duke did not come to the library every day, but he came sometimes. He would stand in the doorway, watching her work. He did not offer to help. He did not speak much, but he watched. And slowly, very slowly, he began to ask questions. "What are you working on today? Have you found anything interesting? Do you read Italian, Miss Hartley?" And Clara, who understood that these questions were not really about the books, answered them carefully, truthfully, without making anything of them. "I am cataloguing the poetry collection today, Your Grace. I found a first edition of Paradise Lost. It is in remarkably good condition. I read Italian passably well. My father taught me. He believed that an educated woman should know at least 3 languages. And do you? Italian, French, and Latin, though my Latin is much better than my Italian." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. I miss him every day." The Duke was silent for a moment. Then he said, "It does not get easier, does it, the missing?" "No," Clara said, "but it gets different, less sharp, more like an old ache than a fresh wound." "I am not sure I want it to get different," the Duke said. "I know," Clara replied, "but it will anyway, whether you want it to or not." He looked at her with those dark, exhausted eyes. "You are a very strange woman, Miss Hartley." "Yes," Clara said, "I have been told that as well." And this time, when he left, she thought she saw the corner of his mouth move. Not a smile, not yet, but the beginning of one. Winter came to Derbyshire with snow and howling wind, and nights so cold that the windows frosted over in fantastical patterns. Clara worked through it, warmed by the fire Mrs. Sims kept lit in the library, wrapped in shawls, her fingers sometimes too cold to hold a pen. The library was taking shape. She had catalogued more than half the collection now. The shelves were orderly. The damaged books had been sent to a bookbinder in Derby for repair. The air no longer smelled of mildew, but of beeswax and paper, and the faint, pleasant mustiness of old leather. And the Duke came more often. Not every day, but most days. He had begun, tentatively, to help. At first, it was small things. Handing her a book from a high shelf, holding the ladder steady while she climbed, moving a heavy stack from one table to another. And then, one afternoon, he said, "May I read while you work? I do not wish to disturb you, but I find I miss this." He gestured vaguely at the room. "Of course, Your Grace," Clara said. "It is your library." "It has not felt like mine for a very long time," the Duke replied. He chose a book from the poetry shelf. Wordsworth, she saw, and sat in the leather chair by the fire. And for the first time in 7 years, the library at Ashford House was used for its intended purpose. A man sat and read, while snow fell outside, and the fire crackled, and the world, for an hour, was quiet and good. Clara worked, and did not make anything of it. But her heart felt lighter than it had in months. It was Pemberton who told her about the dinners. She had been at Ashford House for 3 months now, and it was a bitter January evening. She had come downstairs to fetch more paper from the housekeeper's room, and she found Pemberton in the hall, standing very still, looking at nothing. "Mr. Pemberton," Clara said, "are you well?" The old butler started slightly, as though he had not heard her approach. "Quite well, Miss Hartley, thank you." But he did not look well. He looked shaken. "Has something happened?" Clara asked. Pemberton hesitated. Then he said, "His Grace has requested that only one place be laid for dinner tonight." Clara's heart gave a great, painful thump. "Only one. Only one." Pemberton's voice was very careful, very controlled. "It is the first time in 7 years, Miss Hartley. That is good, is it not?" "I do not know," Pemberton said. "Change, in this house, is not always good. Sometimes it is only different, and sometimes different is more frightening than the thing that came before." He looked at her, and his old, careful face was suddenly full of something Clara had never seen in it before. Hope, and fear of hope. "He has been different since you came, Miss Hartley. I do not know if you are aware of it, but he has. He speaks more. He leaves his rooms. He goes to the library. These are small things, but in this house, small things are everything." "I have only been cataloguing books, Mr. Pemberton," Clara said. "You have been doing more than that," Pemberton replied, "whether you know it or not." That night, Clara could not settle to her work. She tried. She sat at her desk with a stack of books and her catalogue, but her mind would not focus. Only one place at dinner. After 7 years, she thought of the Duke, sitting alone at that long table, with no ghost across from him. She thought of how terrifying that must be. To let go of a ritual, even a painful one, was to admit that the person you mourned was truly gone. And the Duke had not been ready to admit that. Until now. Perhaps. She set down her pen and went to the window. The snow had stopped. The moon was full, and the grounds of Ashford House lay white and still and beautiful under its light. She thought about her father. She thought about the months after his death, when she had kept his study exactly as he had left it, his books on the desk, his pen still lying where he had set it down, as though he might come back at any moment and pick it up again. She thought about the day she had finally put the pen away. How small a thing it had been, how enormous. She understood what the Duke was doing tonight, and she hoped, fiercely, that he would be all right. The next morning, the Duke came to the library earlier than usual. Clara looked up from her work, and her breath caught. He looked different, not healed, not whole, but lighter somehow, as though a weight he had been carrying for 7 years had shifted, just a little. "Miss Hartley," he said, "Your Grace, I wonder if I might ask you something." "Of course." He hesitated, and Clara saw that he was nervous. The great Duke of Ashford, nervous. It made him seem suddenly, unexpectedly human. "I wonder," he said, if you would consider dining with me, tonight, in the dining room. I know it is not customary for a librarian to dine with her employer, and if you find the idea uncomfortable, I will not press it. But I find that I am tired of eating alone, and I thought, perhaps, he trailed off. Clara's heart was beating very fast. I would be honored, Your Grace, she said. The Duke's face did something complicated, relief, gratitude, and something else, something she could not quite name. Thank you, he said. 7 o'clock then. 7 o'clock, Clara agreed. She had nothing to wear. It was a ridiculous thing to worry about, and yet she worried about it anyway. She had 3 dresses. One was her working dress, covered in dust and ink stains. One was her second best, serviceable but plain. One was her best, which was still plain, but at least it was clean and pressed, and a decent dark blue that did not show every speck of dirt. She put on the blue dress. She did her hair as well as she could without a lady's maid. She looked at herself in the small mirror in her room and thought, "You look like a vicar's daughter trying to dine with a duke, which is exactly what you are." But she lifted her chin and went downstairs anyway. Pemberton met her outside the dining room. His face was absolutely expressionless, which she had learned meant he was feeling a great deal. "Miss Hartley," he said, and opened the door. The dining room was lit with candles, dozens of them, hundreds of them, far more than were necessary. The great table, which could seat 20, had been set at one end, intimately, with 2 places, 2 plates, 2 glasses, 2 settings of silver. But this time, both places would be filled. The Duke stood by the fire. He had dressed for dinner, not in the careless way he usually dressed, but carefully, formally, as though this mattered. When he saw her, something crossed his face. Not disappointment, not displeasure, something gentler. "Miss Hartley," he said, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me, Your Grace," Clara replied. They stood awkwardly for a moment, and then the Duke seemed to remember himself. "Please," he said, gesturing to the table. "Sit." She sat. He sat. Pemberton served the soup with the solemnity of a man conducting a religious rite, and then he withdrew, and they were alone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the Duke said, "I do not know how to do this anymore." "Do what, Your Grace?" "This. Dinner. Conversation. Being in company. I have been alone for so long, I have forgotten how." "Then we will have to remember together," Clara said. "I am not very practiced at it either. I have spent most of the last 2 years in the company of elderly ladies and books. Neither are known for their sparkling conversation." The Duke's mouth twitched. "I am not known for my sparkling conversation either, Miss Hartley. You may have noticed." "I had noticed," Clara said, "but I do not require sparkling conversation, Your Grace. Only honest conversation, and I think you are capable of that." "Am I? You have been honest with me since the day I left your book in the corridor," Clara said. "Brutally honest sometimes. I appreciate it." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. "You are not like other women, Miss Hartley." "No," Clara agreed. "I have been told that. Usually it is not meant as a compliment." "I mean it as one," the Duke said. They ate in silence for a while. The soup was very good. Clara had not realized how good the food at Ashford House was, eating alone in her room every night. "May I ask you something, Miss Hartley?" the Duke said at last. "Yes. Why did you leave my book in the corridor? You said you thought I might want it back, but you must have known it would hurt to read it again." Clara set down her spoon. "I did know that," she said, "and I am sorry for the hurt, but I left it because I thought you had been avoiding hurt for so long that you had forgotten there were other things to feel, and I thought, perhaps, if you let yourself hurt again, you might also let yourself feel something else." "Such as?" "I do not know," Clara said honestly. "Hope, perhaps, or at least the memory of hope." The Duke was silent. "You were right," he said at last. "It did hurt, but it also, I read it, and I remembered him, the man who wrote those words. I had forgotten him. I had been so busy being the man who lost her that I had forgotten the man who loved her. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Clara said. "It makes perfect sense." "I want to be him again," the Duke said, very low. "Not the boy. I cannot be the boy again. But the man who could feel joy, who could look forward to things, who could imagine a future." He looked at her, and his eyes were raw. "I do not know if I can, but I want to try." "Then try," Clara said simply. "One day at a time, one dinner at a time, one book at a time. That is all any of us can do." The Duke smiled. It was a small smile, tentative, uncertain, but it was real, and Clara thought, looking at it, that it was the most beautiful thing she had seen in a very long time. After that, they dined together every evening. It became a routine, like the cataloguing of the library. 7 o'clock, 2 places laid, 2 people, no longer alone. They talked of many things, books mostly, at first. The Duke's knowledge was vast and deep, and Clara found herself challenged, delighted, arguing points of philosophy and poetry with a man who could meet her as an equal. But they talked of other things too. The estate, the tenants, the Duke's responsibilities, which he had been neglecting for years and was now, slowly, beginning to take up again. Clara's childhood, her father, her brother who had disappointed her, her hopes, which she had thought long dead, for a life that was more than just survival. And one night, over the pudding, the Duke said, "Will you tell me about her?" Clara's heart stopped. "About whom, Your Grace?" "About Miss Thornley. About what happened in Italy. I have never told anyone, but I think I need to. And I think you are the only person I could tell." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. It was a bold thing to do, scandalous probably, but she did it anyway. "Then tell me," she said, and he did. They had been in Italy for a week, he said, at the villa. The wedding was planned for the following Saturday. Everything was arranged, the flowers, the priest, the guests. Evelyn, Miss Thornley, had been radiant, excited, a little nervous, the way a bride should be. And then, 3 days before the wedding, she had complained of a headache. By that evening, she had a fever. By the next morning, she was delirious. The doctor came. He said it was a brain fever. He said there was nothing to be done but wait and hope. They waited. The Duke sat by her bed for 2 days and 2 nights, holding her hand, whispering to her, begging her to come back. She died on the 3rd day, an hour before dawn. She never woke. She never knew he was there. And the Duke, who had travelled to Italy to be married, came home alone with a coffin and a grief so enormous it swallowed him whole. "I have spent 7 years thinking it was my fault," he said, his voice breaking, "that if I had been more careful, if I had insisted on staying in England, if I had called a better doctor, if I had—" "Stop," Clara said. She gripped his hand tightly. "Stop. It was not your fault. You know that. You must know that. Knowing it and believing it are not the same thing. the Duke said. No, Clara agreed, but you can learn to believe it. It will take time, but you can. How? By forgiving yourself, Clara said, by letting her go, not forgetting her, never forgetting her, but letting her rest, and letting yourself live. The Duke looked at her, and his face was wet. I do not know how to live without her, he said. Yes, you do, Clara said. You have been doing it. For 7 years, you have been surviving. Now you only need to take the next step, from surviving to living, and you do not have to do it alone. Will you help me? The Duke asked. And Clara, who had never expected to be asked such a question, who had never expected to matter so much to anyone, said, Yes, I will help you. Spring came late to Derbyshire that year, but when it came in a rush of green and bird song and sudden piercing beauty. The library was finished. Every book catalogued, every shelf in order. The room no longer smelled of mildew and neglect, but of beeswax and leather and the faint, pleasant scent of old paper. Clara stood in the center of it one morning and felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. She had done what she came to do. The library was whole again, and so, she thought, was the Duke. He still mourned Evelyn, he always would, but he no longer set a place for her at dinner. He no longer walked the halls at midnight like a ghost himself. He had begun to live again. He rode out over the estate. He met with his tenants. He went to church on Sundays, and every evening at 7, he dined with Clara, and they talked, and he smiled more often, and the smiles reached his eyes. She should have been happy. She was happy. But she was also heartsick, because she knew what came next. The work was done. The library was catalogued. Her employment was at an end. She would have to leave. And the thought of leaving, of never seeing the Duke again, of never sitting across from him at dinner, of never hearing his rare, wonderful laugh, was a pain so sharp it took her breath away. She had not meant to fall in love with him, but she had. Somewhere between the dusty books and the quiet dinners and the long conversations by the fire, she had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with a man who was a duke, and who had loved someone else first, and who would never, could never, see her as anything but the woman who had helped him catalogue his books. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she would leave with grace and dignity, and she would find another position, and she would be grateful for the months she had been given. She told herself a great many things that were true and sensible and utterly unbearable. It was the Duke who brought it up first. They were in the library. It was still their place, even though the work was done, and he was reading while she pretended to check a shelf that did not need checking. The library is finished, he said. It was not a question. Yes, Clara said, it is. So you will be leaving. Her throat closed. Yes, I will write to the Duchess of Lennox. She may know of another position. The Duke set down his book. What if I do not want you to leave? He said. Clara's heart stopped. Your Grace, what if I asked you to stay? There is no more work to do, Clara said. The library is catalogued. Then I will find you other work, the Duke said. You could manage the household, oversee the accounts, teach the tenants' children to read. You would be good at that. I do not care what the work is, Miss Hartley. I only know that I do not want you to go. Clara could not breathe. Why? She whispered. The Duke stood. He crossed the room to where she stood, and he looked down at her with those dark, serious eyes that she had come to know so well. Because you saved me, he said simply. Because you came into this house, and you did not pity me, and you did not tiptoe around me, and you did not let me rot in my grief. You handed me my own book, and you told me I was wasting my life, and you were right." He took her hands. "Because I have been happier these past months than I have been in 7 years. Because I look forward to 7 o'clock every evening. Because I want to tell you things, show you things, hear what you think about everything. Because the thought of you leaving is unbearable." "Your Grace," Clara said, and her voice was shaking, "you do not have to offer me employment out of gratitude. I will be all right. I will find something." "This is not about employment," the Duke said, "and it is not about gratitude, though I am grateful, more than you will ever know. This is about the fact that I am in love with you, Clara Hartley, and I have been for weeks, and I did not know how to say it." Clara stared at him. "You? What?" "I love you," the Duke said again, and this time he smiled, that rare, beautiful smile. "I love your bluntness and your cleverness and the way you do not suffer fools. I love the way you catalogued my books and the way you catalogued me. I love the way you see the world, clearly and kindly, without illusions, but without bitterness. I love you, and I am asking you, not as a duke asking his librarian, but as a man asking a woman he admires more than anyone in the world, will you stay?" Clara could not speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. "I know I have no right to ask," the Duke said, and now there was uncertainty in his voice, a vulnerability that undid her completely. "I know I am not an easy man. I know I carry ghosts with me still. I know I may never be entirely whole. But I am better with you than without you. And if you would consider, if you could imagine, a life here, with me, I would count myself the most fortunate man alive." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Clara whispered. "Yes," the Duke said, "though I am making a terrible hash of it. I should be on one knee. I should have a ring. I should—" Clara kissed him. She had never kissed anyone in her life, and she had no idea if she was doing it right, but she did it anyway, rising up on her toes and pressing her lips to his, and it felt like the only true thing she had ever done. The Duke froze for one heartbeat, and then he kissed her back, his arms coming around her, holding her as though she were something precious and fragile and necessary. When they finally broke apart, they were both shaking. "Is that a yes?" the Duke asked. "Yes," Clara said, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Your Grace, yes." "Gideon," he said, "if you are going to marry me, you had better call me Gideon." "Gideon," Clara repeated, and the name felt strange and wonderful in her mouth. "Yes, I will marry you, Gideon." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and Clara felt something shift in the world, some fundamental reordering of the universe. She had come to Ashford House to catalogue a library. She was leaving it as a duchess. No, not leaving. Staying. Finally, blessedly, staying. They were married in the spring, in the little church on the estate, with the Duchess of Lennox in attendance, and beaming with satisfaction. "I knew it," the old lady said to Clara before the ceremony. "I knew you would be good for him. I told you, did I not? Catalogue his books, and perhaps you might catalogue him as well. And you did, my dear, you did." "I did not catalogue him," Clara protested, laughing. "I only reminded him that he was still alive." "That is the same thing," the Duchess said. "Now go and marry my godson before he loses his nerve. He has been pacing in the vestry for an hour." The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Clara wore a dress of white silk that had belonged to Gideon's mother, altered to fit her. Gideon wore his dress uniform from his brief time in the cavalry, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his face did that thing it did now, the thing she loved best. It opened, like a door swinging wide to let in the light. Pemberton cried, silently, in the back pew. Mrs. Sims cried, noisily, in the front. And when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, and Gideon kissed her, the whole church erupted in applause. That evening, for the first time in 7 years, the dining room at Ashford House was full of life. Not just full, alive. There were guests, not many, but enough. The Duchess of Lennox, the vicar and his wife, Pemberton and Mrs. Sims, invited to sit at table for once, instead of serving, which scandalized them both and delighted them even more. The table was laid for 8. 8 plates, 8 glasses, 8 settings of the good silver, every place filled, no ghosts, only living people, eating and drinking and laughing. And at the head of the table, Gideon sat with Clara at his right hand, where a duchess belonged, and he looked around at his household, his friends, his new wife, and he felt something he had thought he would never feel again. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Later, much later, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Gideon and Clara walked through the library together. The room was dark except for the fire, and the shelves stood in orderly rows, full of books that were loved and cared for and ready to be read again. "Thank you," Gideon said. "For what?" Clara asked. "For this, for all of it, for coming here, for staying, for not giving up on me." "I did not do anything special," Clara said. "I only catalogued your books." "You did more than that," Gideon said. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, and they stood there in the firelight, 2 people who had both been lost and had found each other in the most unexpected way. "You reminded me," Gideon said softly, "that even broken things can be mended, that even the most ruined library can be put back in order, that even a man who has loved and lost can love again." He tipped her chin up and looked into her eyes. "I will always love Evelyn. She was my first love. But you, Clara, you are my last love, and you are the one I choose, every day, for the rest of my life." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "And you are mine," she said. "My choice, my love, my home." They kissed, there, among the books, and the library, which had been a tomb, and then a ruin, and then a project, and then a refuge, became at last what it was always meant to be. A living place, a place of warmth and light and love, a place where broken things were mended, a place where new stories began. Epilogue, 5 years later. The dining room at Ashford House was loud, wonderfully, chaotically loud. At the table, 3 small children sat in their places. The oldest, a boy of 4 named Thomas, was trying to feed peas to his younger sister, who was 2 and having none of it. The youngest, a baby of 6 months, sat in his mother's lap and gummed a piece of bread with intense concentration. At the head of the table, Gideon sat and tried to maintain order and failed gloriously. "Thomas, stop tormenting your sister. Margaret, eat your peas. Do not throw them." "Clara, is William trying to eat his napkin?" "He is," Clara said serenely, removing the napkin from the baby's mouth. "He eats everything at the moment. I believe he may be part goat." Gideon laughed, and the sound of it still made Clara's heart lift. He laughed often now. He smiled more. He had grown into the man he was always meant to be, a good duke, a good landlord, a good father, a man who had learned that loving again did not mean forgetting. On the wall of the dining room, in a place of honor, hung a portrait of a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Evelyn Thornley, painted the year before she died. Gideon had hung it there himself, 2 years after he married Clara. She was part of my life, he had said. She should be part of my house, and I want my children to know about her, to know that their father loved before, and that love is not a finite thing, that the heart can hold many loves, and none of them diminish the others. Clara had wept when he said it, and she had kissed him, and she had stood beside him as he hung the portrait. And now Evelyn looked down on the dining room with her kind eyes, and Clara thought that if ghosts existed, Evelyn's was a happy one. Happy that Gideon had found love again. Happy that the house was alive. Happy that the empty plate had been filled. After dinner, when the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Gideon and Clara walked through the library, as they often did. It was their ritual now, the way the empty dinners had once been his. They would walk among the books, and Gideon would pull one down at random, and they would read to each other by the fire. Tonight he chose a volume of poetry, Wordsworth, the same book he had been reading the first day he came back to the library after 7 years. He opened it to a page marked with a ribbon and read aloud, "What though the radiance which was once so bright, be now forever taken from my sight, though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind." He closed the book and looked at Clara. "Strength in what remains behind," he repeated softly. "That is what you gave me, Clara. You taught me to look for the strength in what remained, and I found it. I found you." Clara took his hand. "We found each other," she said. And there, in the library that had once been a tomb and was now a home, they sat by the fire and read poetry and were, both of them, completely and entirely happy. The 2 plates at dinner were always filled now. The library was full of books and children and laughter, and the Duke of Ashford, who had once been the loneliest man in England, was lonely no more. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that love does not end with loss, that the heart, broken, can heal, that the empty place can be filled again, not with a ghost, but with a living, breathing, imperfect, beloved person who stays. And staying, it turned out, was everything. Thank you for staying with us through this long journey from grief to healing, from isolation to love, from empty plates to a full table. Gideon and Clara's story reminds us that the rituals we build around our pain can become prisons, but they can also become doorways, if someone brave enough comes along and asks us why we built them. If their story moved you, please leave a like and tell us in the comments, what ritual or habit would you be willing to let go of if it meant finding happiness again? And be sure to subscribe for more stories of second chances, quiet courage, and the transformative power of being seen. We'll see you next time.